Welcome to Guts. I'm Joey Donovan Guido, your host, and today we're going to be talking with Kyle Wege, owner of Crimson Sun Studios, which is a company that specializes in photography, motion, and time-lapse. And that said, what Kyle does for a living is only a small part of what we'll be talking about today. Here's a breakdown of the topics we'll be discussing. What prompted Kyle to start his business and how he did it. How having kids changed how Kyle runs his business. Striking a balance between being a dad, husband, and business owner. The most challenging part of being a parent who runs a business. We'll also talk about consciousness and being in the present moment, as well as tools and practices to help us be in the moment, even when we're experiencing strong emotions or thoughts. And finally, we're also, as always, going to ask Kyle what has been one of the biggest challenges you've faced and how you handled it. So a little bit more about Kyle's background. Kyle Wege is a commercial photographer, musician, husband, and father. He owns and operates Crimson Sun Studios, providing commercial photography with specialties in architecture, fantastic photos, by the way, drone, time-lapse, and portraits. Kyle plays bass guitar and actively writes and performs music with Madison-based groups Dub Foundation and Red Rose. Outside of work and creative pursuits, Kyle enjoys time with his family, camping and hiking, and works to fit in the occasional game of basketball with friends at local courts. And before I officially introduce you, Kyle, I'd like to say if we ever play basketball, watch out, because I have a mean right elbow. And with that, Kyle, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Joey. Excited to be here.
Yeah, man. So let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
Tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about, you kind of told us who you were in your bio, but who you are and what you do at Crimson Sun Studios.
Sure. So Crimson Sun Studios, you accurately described as a company providing photography, motion, and time-lapse. I specialize in commercial photography, which means no weddings or babies or families or any of that kind of stuff. Mostly doing architecture, some professional portraits, some product photos, and that's pretty much it. I mean, along with video and in the same aspects, in the same regard, just storytelling to help companies, share their story and what they do in their marketing.
Okay, cool. And what prompted you to open up your own business instead of like going to work somewhere else?
Yeah.
And how did you do it?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel the same way and who have felt the same way as I felt. I started my business when I was pretty young. I mean, right now I'm 33. I started it in 2014. So, I must have been mid 20s or so, early 20s. And I'd been working since I turned 16. The day that I got my driver's license is the day I started my first job, which I'm glad it worked out well, or else my dad would have had to bring me to work. But ever since then, I can't say I've had a boss that I've really liked. I've had managers that I've really liked, but they're not the ones who approve my paychecks. They're not the ones who, are the ones that hired me or anything like that, or had anything to do with my future at the company. They're just the ones who I answered to and who also had somebody to answer to. So for me, working multiple jobs throughout my life, I had been told by a lot of people, you start off strong, you do a good job, and then you plateau and you don't seem to keep working hard. And that was definitely the case, because I just didn't care. It was like I would show up and try to work hard to learn the job and to feel like I was contributing something. And then once that happened, and once, I wasn't making any more money, it was just, here I am, this is what I do every day. It just got boring. There wasn't any special aspect to it. I never had like a commission job or a sales job. I was always kind of in the service industry. And so I had finally got a job working as a photographer for a company here in Madison, doing sports, youth sports, and that kind of thing, school pictures. And for me, that was amazing. I was super excited because I've been doing photography most of my life. My dad was a hobbyist. And so I grew up with his film cameras, and we would go out in the backyard and do long exposures and just fun stuff with lights and all sorts of experimental things. So that was kind of an interest of mine for a long time. And so being able to then work full time as a photographer for this company was super interesting. And, I felt grateful because now every single day I just get to go out and take photos, and I didn't really care what I was doing. I just get to take photos every single day. I'm in a new place, And so that was cool. I worked there for about 3 years, and a year and a half in being that job. I wasn't even close to where I thought I would be from a pay standpoint and from a leadership standpoint. I thought I was doing a great job and that things were picking up and that I was moving in that direction. And the owner of the company, who I would review my images with and go over things with, basically kept telling me like, oh, no, you're not at this level yet. We can't pay you this. We can't get you there. It'll be just a little more time. Maybe next year we'll be able to get you at this pay level, which, I didn't understand where he was coming from. Maybe he was right, maybe not. But for me at that point, I realized like I'm the sole purpose you make money, right? Getting a contract is one thing, and it's very difficult. Doing sales is certainly a tough job, and I give people credit for doing that. But you can't sell something that doesn't exist. And so I'm literally out there creating the product for you. And if it sucks, people aren't going to pay you money. And so like, it's very important that I'm here doing a good job, or else you have no business. And I realized that. I was like, okay, so I can do this on my own. Why don't I just try? And so I started an LLC, which is super easy to do now here in America. You just go online and just start an LLC and pay the money and, do the things you need to do, find out what documentation you need to do the job, and just set it up. It was super simple. I went to my credit union and started a separate bank account and just put some money in there and just bought some gear and just started doing it part-time. It's the hustle that everybody talks about. Like, what's your side hustle? Well, for me at that time, it was Crimson Sun Studios. And so I just started learning about what I wanted to do, just started creating imagery that I could use in a portfolio, just experimented. The way that I learned best is just by doing something and then failing and seeing like, oh, okay, cool. Well, that didn't work. What could I do next time? Or how could it be better next time? And that's just a slow roll to get to where I'm at now, and that was 9 years ago or something. And now things are great. My portfolio is 100 times better. I just keep practicing and keep putting time and energy into it because it's a thing that I really care about. And the thing I've noticed is working for myself. I haven't hit a plateau. Like maybe I have at some points where I feel like, okay, things are going well. I don't have to strive really hard to stretch. I can be where I'm at and provide value where I'm at. But it's not the same, right? And this is like a kind of a commission-based thing. Whereas if I don't get work, I make no money, right? It's not like I'm selling insurance or something where I can just keep getting residuals off of whatever I've done last year. Like I need new projects, like new work to come in that will bring me out on location or into the studio or whatever. And so that was a huge motivating factor that I had no idea about. So maybe when I was younger, if I would have had a sales job selling something that I really, really loved, I would have excelled in that. I probably would have done very well. For me, I can't sell a thing that I don't care about. I love photography and video so much. I love what I do. I live and breathe it. I wake up every day, and if I didn't do this for a living, I would still be watching photographers and how they do their process and what they shoot on and new cameras and technology and editing practices and just what's happening, what's changing in the market. Like I'd be paying attention to that no matter what. So the fact that that's now my job, just keeps pushing me to new heights, and I just can't ever see myself getting sick of it. So for any folks who are like, hey, should I do my hobby as a job? Hell yeah, you should do your hobby as a job, because you might get burned out on it from some points, and be very careful about that. But if you want to like what you do, like do your hobby, like my dad told me that when he was younger. Oh, I didn't pursue photography because I didn't want to ruin my hobby. Well, he worked so much that he didn't get to do his hobby, and now he doesn't take photos at all, And so it's like, well, now I get to do my hobby every single day, and I get to excel at something that I love and sell something that I'm extremely passionate about. Most people don't get to say that. Some people are janitors, or some people are stuck in a cubicle just trying to make money because now they've got a family and now they've got high levels of responsibility, and it's not so easy to quit and leave. As when I was young, I didn't have any responsibility. If I failed, it didn't really matter. Like I could just start, I could go get a job at Subway, which is where I worked before. I was doing all the other jobs that I had done. So
yeah. Oh, that's great. I mean, you encapsulated a lot with that. That was amazing. And You're welcome. You made me think of a bunch of things I wanted to follow up on that I've forgotten. But but one thing that I actually wrote down was you mentioned about plateauing. And I really feel like it was one of the good parts of what you just told us was how you were kind of being given this feedback about plateauing and had an awareness of it. And then when you started your own business, you were like, hey, that's not happening. But I also thought it was funny that you mentioned that today, because I just had this conversation with myself and then my wife the other day, because, I do guts, right? Guts is kind of my side hustle, right? I don't do that full time. So I do the podcast and I do workshops. And I thought to myself the other day, like, oh, I'm good. Like I've got the things I study and I'm just going to keep, working on and learning from that. And then I caught myself. I said, what? No, how am I going to learn more if I just stay in this plateau, right? This space I'm at, because I can, if you said, hey, do a workshop right now, I could do one and it would be useful and helpful and have value. But do I really want to keep kind of coasting there, or do I want to learn more to add more value, or maybe be able to answer a question more effectively or teach something more clearly? So my son, Max, he works in Barnes and Noble when he's not in school, when he's not in college. So I got 2 books. I got Marcus Aurelius and I also got Seneca. They're both guys who do the Stoic studies, which I'm learning about. Yeah. And I love it. I just want to plug it into my head and download it. So I have all the information. And so I can just kind of muddle it over and process it. But I think that's really important, because when you are running a business, there are going to be times where you are burnt out, where you're handling, paying the bills and keeping a ledger and wondering, okay, am I going to make it next month? Sometimes that happens in the beginning. Sometimes it happens 5-6 years in. Pandemic, hello, that can really throw a wrench in things. And then you've also, if you're a creative, you've got to lean on that creative side when you're burnt out. And that can sometimes be super hard. So, all right.
Yeah, lots there. I would say the stoicism stuff is amazing. Like you said, when you're years into a business, you don't expect to all of a sudden have the floor pulled out from under you, like so many of us had in 2020 when the pandemic happened. I mean, that for me was as equally bad as my first year in business, And so it was like, what do I do? I'm lucky that I've got a wife who, has a job and she didn't get fired and she works at a hospital. So it was like at least half of us has a paycheck, and the other half is still working on what we can do. And a nice thing about being self-employed is you've got flexibility. I had the time to be able to do more parenting aspects, to make meals, to figure stuff out for the future and what we were going to do. And one of the thoughts that popped into my head at that time was like, oh man, I don't have income right now. Like I'm guaranteed not to have income for the next 3 months. What should I do? Like, should I go get a part-time job? Should I start delivering food with Uber? Should I, do any of these things? And in my mind, like I'm probably my toughest critic. And I think for some people that's really good. Some people, you want to have very positive self-talk all the time. Other times you want to be your toughest coach. And for me, I think I'm best when in my mind, I'm my toughest coach. And so the thing that I kept saying was just like, no, don't do that. Like, don't do that. Like, that's a stupid idea. Don't go get some other job that's not has anything to do with your business. Like, that is the worst idea you've ever had. Like, instead, just reinvest your time, reinvest your passion, and just push forward. Figure out what you can do. What are the problems now? When are things going to change? How can you adapt and keep moving forward on the path that you're on? Don't change things right now just because all of a sudden it got hard. Like, you can still do this, and this isn't going to last forever. Just focus on where you need to be, and try to get there, and don't change. Don't go take some $15 an hour job or even less to just try to pay some bills right now. I mean, like, look, if you have to do that, then you have to do that, right? If you have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, then that's what you have to do. Unfortunately, we're not always in a position where it's like we're sitting on thousands and thousands of dollars. We don't have to work for a couple of months. But in my situation, it wasn't terrible. We had enough to live off of for a few months. So that was my approach forward, is just, don't quit, don't stop, because perseverance is the main way that we all reach our goals.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've been there. and you know this, I've been there where I've had 3 jobs, and when I left a full-time job that was basically life sucking, and started Cup SEO and worked at a firm doing SEO and writing, and I also worked in the Apple store. And man, I mean, like this is when I was starting, right? So I was pulling 60 to 80 hours a week, but it was easier and less stressful than when I was working 40 hours a week at a job that was just horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you've got more control, you've got more autonomy over what you do. You feel, more connected to the work. Whereas if you're working just for some other business that you don't control or that you don't own, you just might feel like a cog in the machine. That's how I felt for every other job where I was employed, and it wasn't my baby. It wasn't me setting it up, or I wasn't highly invested. I mean, before I went full time for my business, I was working for another video company that was run by a good friend of mine. And it was odd because I thought going into it that, like, I was going to be a partner. I was going to be some kind of a creative lead here. And that's kind of how it started. And then it quickly turned into me being an employee. And it was not at all what I wanted. And again, it was the same thing, plateauing. My access towards getting paid more wasn't happening. My, trust as being a leader wasn't there. My trust in just doing any part of the job wasn't there. They just, were telling me what to do and dictating my times when I had to be there and what I could be doing and everything like that. And it was terrible, just terrible. Like, nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common story. I think that's why we leave corporate America, or even small businesses, that they fall into the same kind of ideology where you become that cog in the wheel. So, all right. So it's an interesting question for you, because we've talked a bit about your work, and everything you're saying resonates with me. I was in similar situations in my professional career, and now all of a sudden you've got kids. And in your case, now you have 2 kids. You have Milo, who's your youngest, and then you have Farron. And how has having kids changed how you run your business?
Oh, man. It's changed things and it's not changed things. I would say until you're a parent, you have no idea what it's like to be a parent. Like, there's no way you could possibly know. It's like saying, oh yeah, I know what it feels like to get shot. No, you don't. You don't have any freaking idea what it's like to get shot until you get shot. Then you know. Then you have the feeling. Then you live with it. Then it's there. For me, as a parent, like, it's similar in terms of being a business owner, where it might be the best feeling you've ever felt, and then in the same day, the lowest feeling you've ever felt. It's just so difficult, and the ride on that roller coaster is dynamic. So that's one of the things for me I had trouble, and still have trouble managing, is just like the emotional state of being a parent and also the emotional state of being a business owner. Just riding the waves and trying not to let the emotion overwhelm you, like understanding that parenting is difficult, and being there for them is almost more important than running your business at sometimes. Obviously, you need to create income. You need to be able to be stable as a family and like have some ability to live and prosper in your life. But raising a human to be a respectable member of our society is like the most important job you could possibly do. Like, if you fail as a parent, and you might not even know that you're failing, like I could be failing right now and I don't know, it's just a bummer, because you get so far down the road and realize that it's not reversible. You can't change it. Like, you got to be present in every action that you take, and you have to be able to look back on things that you did yesterday and ask, how could I do it better tomorrow? So I think, doing both, being a parent and running a business, can play into each other in terms of like the qualities that you get from either can be good qualities for the other. Like, if I'm a good leader in my business, I can be a good parent. And if I'm not a good parent, I might not be a good business person. I might not be connecting right with my clients. I might not be putting myself forward enough to be like emotionally open to make, good relationships with people. So I think both, show those kind of characteristics and quality of human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, my boys are both teenagers now, and it's been interesting because when I started my business, I was working probably close to 8 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours a day, and but my wife got sick a little over 5 years ago, and that really, not so much the parenting aspect, but the whole family aspect and the caregiver aspect of what had to become like normal caregiving threw me for a loop. I mean, it was really hard to find any semblance of balance, and I still struggle with it today. And I think from what you've said and from what I've experienced, like the hardest thing for me has been acceptance. Like accepting, okay, this is what is, not surrendering and putting up the white flag and saying, oh, well, poor me, but saying, okay, this is how it is. And I'm only going to get in 3 hours today because of doctor appointments or whatever else is going on. Right. Or I'm not going to get any work done today because this is going on. And as you said, for me also, family comes first. That is the number one priority. That's my number one, quote unquote, job. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard, brother. It's hard to be in acceptance day after day, week after week, month after month. And you're seeing somebody suffer. It's with the kids, it's similar because your kids for a long time, like, okay, they might be in daycare and stuff like that, but you still got to pick them up early. You still got to drop them off. And then all of a sudden, one day, it's like they're taking the bus. And you're like, you don't have to drive anywhere. They're taking themselves to and from school. But the years before that feel like they're never going to end. And you kind of wind up wondering, well, how can I grow the business when I'm limited on the amount of time and energy I have? At least that's the experience I have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. It's so interesting. A lot of the things of what you say about how you're trying to stay visual in the moment, right? About what's happening, I think comes back to stoicism in ways of like, don't focus on the problem, focus on the solution. Because if you focus on the problem, you're going down in a spiral of negativity. Like that's been my key understanding of like, the more that I focus on when I get depressed and when I'm feeling bad, is like I just keep dwelling on the shit. Like how like, oh, it sucks so much. Like, oh, why did I do this? Like all this stuff now is happening. Tomorrow's going to suck. Like, I just don't feel good. Like everything's bad. Like I just keep focusing. It's just like a tape loop in my head that just keeps cycling. And so the thing I have to then realize is like, yeah, this is right now. Like, stuff sucks right now, but you're not dead, right? Like you're still here. Like, what can you do to change to change the future? What can you do to get yourself out of this? Like, what can you actually control? I can't control anybody other than myself. I can't control my daughter. She freaks out sometimes and gets mad when we say, no, you can't have this, you can't have that, or it's time for bed, or I'm not done yet, or whatever. I can't control her. All I can do is just try to control myself. And I think if you put the focus on like, what step for action can I take to move forward to get to the goal where I want to be, I think that helps you reframe your mindset from negative to positive, right? Because then you've got a goal, you've got action, you've got something you can move forward on. And as soon as you take a step forward, instead of taking a step back or just sitting in this soup of negativity, you start to get that positive feeling. You start to feel like I have worth again. Like there's something that's happening here that makes me feel good about myself. And then that just, it can just cascade. You take one step after another step, even if it's hard, even if you're trudging, even if you feel like all the weight's on your shoulders, like, then you can look back and say like, well, yesterday was worse, but today I woke up and I feel a little better, there's some good things happening. And then maybe you get a call, especially as a business owner, where it's like, hey, we're looking for this. And then I'm like, hey, sweet. Okay. This would be an awesome job. And then there's something that's a positive light rather than just like all this negative stuff in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, what you've just brought up is what you're talking about, that rumination that you have.
Yeah.
I call that the river, and then, so, and that can be like you're drowning in the river, right? If it's just, it's like all encompassing, when you've got these thoughts and feelings going on and you're literally drowning in them. And then, I love what you said about how you're kind of looking at it, what I call observing it. You're kind of making some space, taking a step back and be like, okay, here's what's happening. And as you start to observe it, you're starting to use your mind to solve a problem, to be constructive or productive, instead of the mind just like hammering on you, right? So
Yeah.
in the first case, it's controlling you. In the second case, it's a tool that you're using to be more positive, to make a solution, or just to accept, hey, this sucks. This is how it is right now. And like you said, this is not forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to bring up, whether it's about business or your spouse or yourself or your kids. It's to be able to make that space, to be able to literally imagine yourself stepping out of the river. The river can still be raging, right? Mm-hmm. Just because we give it some space or some distance and we're observing it doesn't mean we don't feel what we're feeling anymore. It just means there's another layer, which is exactly what you just described. And that other layer helps us kind of, I guess, move forward, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it to me, it comes down to understanding that like your flow of consciousness isn't necessarily you, right? The thoughts that happen within your head are just like a chemical reaction of your instance and what's happening. Like you don't control that. That's not you. And when you can separate yourself to observe, as you said, that consciousness or that mental space that you're in, you have choices. All of a sudden you have choices. Whereas before you felt like you didn't have choices, right? You're on a raft riding that river. Well, guess what, man? You can use a paddle, or you can pull off and try to like step out of the river for a moment and just observe on what's happening. And I think doing that, which holy crap, does that take a lot of effort to get there, right? Like I don't meditate as much as I should. And being a parent and having young kids makes it even harder. But before I had kids, I was meditating at least a couple of times a week, and that helped. And then when I became a parent, the thing that helped the most, I probably should have been doing more, which would have been meditation. But, these days now, like to give an example, driving in Madison sucks. Man, does it suck. People here just like they everybody's got a place to be. Either people are doing 15 under, 25 over, everybody cuts you off. It's just rough. It's like, I can feel that emotion and energy and that anger, and I could lash out, which sometimes happens. I don't control myself in the best way all the time, right? Like, but a good mental state for me is to just, it's a mantra that I've been saying, to choose peace. Just choose peace. Just if somebody wrongs you, like whatever, like I'm not dead. I'm here. Like maybe you had a reason, right? Maybe there was something you had to get to, or maybe your emotional state is so chaotic right now that how could I possibly blame you, because you are just drowning in that freaking river. You don't even know you're drowning in the river, and you could step back from it. And for me to be angry at you for it doesn't make any sense. But in the moment, that's the emotion that's going to come up, because we're just animals that live on this earth, and we are just here by evolution. And, it's like we've come up with, all these fight or flight mechanisms, things that helped us years and years and years ago, but don't necessarily help us in the society that we've constructed now. And so if you're just responding emotionally right in the moment, you're probably not making the best decisions for yourself. And honestly, that's what you want to be doing, is making the best decisions for yourself. Because if you're not going to be the best version of yourself. And if you're not the best version of yourself, you're going to fail at everything else you do. You're going to be a worse parent. You're going to be a worse business owner. You're going to be a worse friend, or a worse husband or wife, or anything like that. Like, as selfish as it sounds, and it was a very odd thing for me to make this association in my mind, but you really have to put yourself first, right? Like when you're on an airplane and you have to put your mask on first, it's because if you die, you can't help your kids, like you can't help the person next to you if you're dying. So you have to make sure that you are able to do the thing you need to do, that people are trusting you for, which means being in a good, healthy mindset, being healthy, working out, eating the right foods, like just, making sure that tomorrow I'm not going to be in a compromised position. So it's tough, you got to practice. Everything takes practice. When you don't when you don't move through a situation in the way that you'd like to, I think it is a good idea to reflect and think like, okay, well, that's going to happen again. What could I do different next time? And if you just take one small step in that direction next time, you're better, because you're not going to, you're not going to all of a sudden flip the switch and there you are, everything's perfect, everything's right. Like, cool, you've got full control over your emotional state and you're never going to get angry again when somebody cuts you off or they flip you off, or, I'm in the right and you're in the wrong. Like, it just doesn't matter, dude. It's just one moment of time, and it goes by so fast. We won't be here, who knows, tomorrow's not promised. So it's like, just try to enjoy your time and try to be a positive influence on the world around you.
Yeah Goodness, we've discussed a lot of the topics that I had questions about. We're just kind of diving into it naturally. And it's that's what I've done that, like it's almost like having that plan in place, because it's one thing, we make mistakes, right? Everybody makes mistakes, and I think forgiving ourselves can sometimes be difficult. And when I was a younger parent, my dad was a yeller. My dad yelled about everything. And so when I became a dad, one of my goals was to not yell. And early on, this was more of a struggle for me. And what I started to do was I'd be like, okay, like, this happened, like what triggered me? And this is hard. It's easy to talk about in retrospect, but it's hard when you're tired, when you're running the business and your kid has got an ear infection and your wife is running ragged at work and you're feeling guilty because you're not bringing in enough money and, you're run down. It's hard to sit there and be contemplative,
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? That's part of that acceptance. It's not always going to happen. But one of my goals was, all right, what triggered me? And I realized a lot of the things that were triggering my desire to yell, or my actual yelling, were things that my dad did to me. Like just like a chaotic or a negative thing, or the kids yelling. And I wasn't realizing that was triggering trauma for me as an adult from what happened to me when I was a little boy. And obviously, when my kids were real small, they're not going to like say, oh, well, dad had trauma, so I better not ever yell or fight with my brother.
Right.
So it wasn't about evoking a change in them. It was about understanding what triggered it. So at least I had made a little bit of space. Okay. That's happening right now. There's that observation. I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time.
Yeah.
But when I observed it, I could be like, all right, you know what? It's okay. That's not my dad. What are my options? I could yell. I could remove myself and literally just get on your feet and get out of the room if something is triggering you, right? Take a breath. And so I started to learn these tactics, not really understanding how, just the universe was kind of giving me advice as to what to do. Like if your kid is crying and crying and crying and you're kind of on dad duty and it's 3:00 in the morning, do we want to let our kids cry it out? No, that's been proven to be baloney. And I knew that before it was scientifically proven. We don't want to do that to our kids. And it's okay to put them in the crib for 2 minutes and go in a different room, grab a drink of water, take a couple deep breaths. They're not going to be scarred for life for 2 minutes. My opinion was always, if we left the kids in the crib and let them cry it out for hours, that creates a model where children don't feel supported.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm so torn on all this stuff. Like, I feel like my opinions on everything are almost split down the middle because I can see the perspectives and opinions of everybody. And I try to take it into account. And I do feel the same way as you. Is like, you can't just leave a kid cry for an hour by themselves and just not go in there, say anything, not be a supportive human. Like, first of all, it kills you on the inside. Like, boy, is it difficult to do that. And second of all, like, it's probably not bringing you to the solution that you want. I mean, for us, the way that we've approached it is because our kids, we've had to do sleep training for both of them, and it's both been different in terms of like when they fall asleep or when they don't fall asleep or how they wake up, or, do they stay asleep? And a lot of it has been a mix of both, letting them cry for certain periods of time and then coming in and saying, hey, I'm here. You're not alone. I'm with you, rubbing their back and, just like giving them some kind of a compassion, empathetic, parenting to say like, hey, you're fine, everything's okay, but it's bedtime, you know, like right now we have to sleep. And just approaching it in a way, again, where there's a goal and you're trying to be, I mean, communicative to a baby seems fucking stupid, right? Like you can't.
Not at all,
I
actually.
mean, like I talk to them like they're humans because they are humans, and I don't like baby talk necessarily. I think there's a lot of things that don't help with that. Like you should communicate with words. You should communicate the way that humans communicate to each other because that's how they learn. So that's how I communicate to my kids. Even when they're babies, I just talk to them. I say, hey, Milo, like it's cool, man. I know that you don't want to go to sleep. I know that you don't understand what's happening. But right now you need to sleep. It's bedtime. It's night. This is when we sleep. Mom and I are trying to get sleep. That doesn't obviously help him. But then when I walk out of the room and he's still crying, at least I feel like, you know, I've done something to help. And then I'm going to come back in 10 minutes and, you know, I'm here. I'm still here, bud. Like, it's okay. I know it's okay. But this is the time when we got to sleep right now. And you're working through phases and it's not always easy. They don't understand what's going on, but like, you know, you have to create the routine. You have to build that kind of a schedule within their brain, which might not be intuitive. You know, like they might not want to sleep during the night and they might sleep during the day, but you got to flip it. You're the one that, you know, you're the leader that has to make the change in this, you know, this group of humans that you're leading here as a parent. You know, it can be in so many ways. You could be the military, it could be work, it could be your family. You know, it's still the same structure. You still have to figure out, how do I lead these people to where they need to be? How do I make the changes happen in an empathetic but genuine way? You know, it's not being forced on you. You want to make the change, because change doesn't stick if it's forced on you.
Yep.
You know, like just in any thought-provoking way. Like if somebody gets shown music, they're like, oh, that's cool. But if you discover music, like if you discover a band that all of a sudden you're like, hey, this is great, like, man, you're tuned in, you want to tell everybody about that. But it's not going to be the same for all the people you tell. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's cool. But it's not discovery, you know, like it's just a certain method of psychology where like discovery can help make change, right? You want to be the instrument that helps somebody discover something about themselves. And it's pretty damn hard to do that with a baby, right? To have a baby discover something about themselves. But I mean, you see it in all sorts of ways when they learn to walk and when they learn to crawl and when you play peekaboo and all these things. It's all discovery. So it's like, how can you guide that way to get to the goals that you want and to help them reach the goals that they should have.
Yeah. For me, it all comes down to trust. Like we've talked about business, we've talked about parenting, and like whether it's a client or your kid, you're either building or diminishing trust, or it sits where it is, right? It kind of plateaus back to that plateau.
Sure.
And I had a similar parenting style when my kids were small, and I still do. It's like, am I building trust or am I eroding it? And, you know, whether it's, I remember Max taking him to the health food store and letting him pick his rice. Do you want brown rice or white rice? And he was like 5 months old. He couldn't talk yet, but I'd show him, I'd ask him, and he'd look at one specific. He'd stare at one. And, you know, they may not understand the words when they're babies. Maybe they do, who knows, because they're more connected to the universe than we are as adults, with all that crap that we carry around. But, you know, it's the energy is felt. The support is felt. The empathy is felt. And it's, to me, like kind of the way you described it sounded great, you know, and like, to me, just going back to that, letting the kid cry it out. The kid is left deserted. How does that build trust? It's the same when the kid is older and they get in trouble. And, you know, we never hit our kids. And we never believed in that. And there are some people who do it, and they do it in a very specific way. I still don't believe in it, but they do it in a very calm way. And then there are parents who do it in a way that is kind of, they're angry when they do it. But to me, regardless, if you're training somebody to do something because of fear, one, it's never going to be the decision not to do it or to do something. They're going to be afraid. And do you want your kid to be afraid to call you if it's 2:00 in the morning and they've had some drinks and they're the one who's driving? Do you want your kid to be afraid in that moment to say, hey, Dad, I screwed up. Can you please come and get me? I know I don't. I want them to be able to know that, there might be repercussions, but I want them to trust that I got their back.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing to think about, right? Like how do you get there? How do you build that trust? Like how do you I think it part comes from just being an open, genuine person, right? There's a lot of parents who hide aspects of themselves that maybe they're not proud of, or they hide their mistakes because they don't want their kids looking at them as like just an infallible human. Like, oh, you're just a failure. You had failures. You're not this perfect superhero that I thought was my dad. You know, it's like you have to show them that because that's how they trust you. That's how they understand that, like, oh, yeah, my dad's been through some shit. Like, he's not a perfect person. Like, even though I messed up right now, like he's messed up too, you know, and like I can call him because he's probably got experience, you know, and hopefully that's the kind of thing that can happen. But man, it's really tough, you know. And like you said, you don't want to lead with fear. Sometimes that just happens, you know. Just to share some examples, like I've noticed from myself that like in a lot of situations I can keep calm. But when I have a situation where I'm actually physically feeling pain, like I freak out, you know, like that's where it all melts down for me. And that's where one of the things that I need to fix moving forward. But I don't know, like even just recently, like playing with my daughter and she hit me with a like a mallet or something, you know, it was just a musical instrument. And I got mad and I took it and I threw it and I yelled at her and I was like, what are you doing? Like, don't hit me. I told you already not to be swinging this thing around. You already almost hit your brother. And like, it wasn't the best way to approach the situation, but you know, it's like, what do? You gotta just move forward and try to learn from that, you know. But I don't know, man, there's a lot of things that you can do, I think, to train for that kind of thing, you know, like how in the military or other things, they put you into situations where you're like, you're feeling it, right? It's torture. Like, what do you do in these torturous situations? What do you do when you are getting gassed, or what do you do when you're getting tortured? Like, can you maintain, you know? It's even on like sports teams and stuff, like they kick your ass to get you, this is what it's going to be like in the fourth quarter. You're going to be tired, you're going to be hurt. How do you keep going on? I think I need to find a way to train myself in that, like to, you know, to beat myself up and then find ways to be empathetic. It's tough.
It is tough, but I'm not liking the idea of you beating yourself up.
Well, I don't mean to actually like beat myself up, but to train. I think you have to actually train for the things you're going to go through. Just like in Stoicism, like you have to be willing and ready to embark on the shit. You have to be ready to lose everything you have. You have to be ready to endure torture. You have to be ready to go through those things and still think like, I'm still myself. I'm still worthwhile. Like I can still move forward. Like if I lose everything, like I still have myself in my mind and I still have my ability to be a good person. But to actually train yourself to either, you know, run to the point of exhaustion, or to, you know, go and I mean, geez, like monks who start themselves on fire and then they sit and meditate, you know, like that is the most insane thing. But how do you do that? They didn't just do it. That wasn't the first time. You know, we see the Rage Against the Machine cover of the monk who's on fire. Like he's not sitting there meditating because that was his first time ever doing that. Like he, you know, put in effort and effort and effort to get himself to that point. And it just comes back to practice. Like anything that you want to reach in your life, man, you just have to keep doing it. It's not going to happen the first time.
Yeah.
And to think of yourself as like one point in time, like as a failure, oh, it didn't happen now. Like, yeah, it didn't happen now. Just keep trying. You have to practice. Like the business doesn't happen now. Like good parents don't just happen all of a sudden. Like you might have good examples to reach from. If you had great parents that were good examples, like, yeah, be like them. But if you didn't, like, that's an example of what you can learn from
do
and
the
see
opposite.
from in yourself. Yeah. And just, I mean, there's always a point of connection, I think, where you need to try to understand where was that person coming from? Like, why did that happen? Just the same when I'm in traffic and I get cut off, like, you know, the benefit of the doubt, like they probably had a tough situation. Maybe their parents were rough on them. Maybe they grew up in a time where it just wasn't valued to be empathetic. It was more valued to work your ass off and to get from point A to point B, because if you didn't, you might die. you know, like real legitimate reasons of why somebody might act the way that they did. You know, I mean, generations before us had to endure way harder shit than we had to endure. I know, like my great grandparents, like, what are you going to do? Like, you don't have food. You have to grow your own food. You know, you've got a farmstead that somebody's maybe going to come and try to steal shit from. And cops are, you know, what are you going to call them on your telegram or something, you know, SOS or something? To just think of where we are now and the things that we've got, to reframe your perspective and try to understand where other folks are coming from. I think all of those are good tools to try to, I don't know, move yourself forward, you know, to try to be the better leader, to try to grow yourself. The only thing you control is yourself.
Yeah, no, I thank you for clarifying, because the reason why I said that about the beating up to me is like judging, right? And I've done that ad nauseum in my life until very recently. I did it on a daily basis. So, you know, judging ourselves, labeling ourselves, that's not healthy. Training ourselves is different. And again, it's taking that different mindset, right? Yes, this happened, and what can I do about it? As opposed to this just happened and I suck and this and that and negative, 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 which is just, you know, you're not a nail to hammer yourself into the ground. You are a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You are a being who's going to make mistakes. And if we learn from our mistakes or try and grow from it, and the mistake might happen a dozen times before we can get it right. You know, I'm happy to say now, you know, I very, very, very rarely yell at anybody. You know, and now it's become the new normal. It's not an effort like it used to be.
Yeah.
And something else you brought up, it's really interesting, because like I can sometimes be, like you said, when you get physically, if you have pain, like you kind of, you're drowning in it, right? It's hard to observe it and be like, okay, that's cool. If this pain will go away. You're like, oh, this hurts. And
it's instantaneous. Like,
yeah.
just automatic. You get bit by your child. You're like,
Yeah,
it's a reaction to the physical, you know?
Yes. And you get sucked completely into the pain, or what I call unconsciousness of it, right? Or the ego, different words for the same thing. And what's happening to me now, and it's kind of surreal, because I'll be having like these really strong emotions, really strong, really upset. And at the same time, I'm observing it and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really upset right now. And it's weird, man, because like to be like this observer of the self, but the self like still kind of trying to climb out of the river.
Yeah.
And it's also progress, because there was a time when there was just the river, and the river was everything. There was no observer. And by the way, you know, for those of you listening, if you're wondering like what I'm talking about this observer, that's what I have learned in my studies, is that's what's true consciousness. That observer is the self that goes beyond thought, that goes beyond emotion. And that's something you said earlier, Kyle, is like, you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts and your emotions are something you experience, but you are not them. And that was a big kind of defining moment for me when I learned that and was actually able to understand beyond cognitive process, understand that I am not my thoughts. And so it was kind of mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the same for me. I mean, I don't think it's an intuitive thing to realize that like the thoughts that are in my brain are not me. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm the one thinking them. How is it not me? Like, hey man, you're not trying, right? You're not trying. It's not like, you know, like even though I'm breathing, like that's not me consciously breathing. It's happening in the subconscious, and there might be things that are being brought up in my subconscious. And I mean, man, it's you don't even know what kind of hidden stuff is in your genes, right? There's a lot that gets passed from human to human through generations of people that could have been trauma and all sorts of things that infer how you react, right? I think it's necessary, because otherwise, how are you going to learn from the past generations, from the evolution of your ancestors? Like, it's baked into you. I think there's things that just happen. And so it's not you, it's just the response from the system that you encompass, right? And so you are in this flesh suit of a human, and you know, you have inputs that come, and then there's things that happen, and you need to be the observer. You need to be the one who can step out of it and make decisions about it. But I mean, how do you approach that, right? Because I think meditation is probably one of the stronger ways to make observation of a key part of your life. I think also finding activities where you get into like a flow mindset can do the same thing, because all of a sudden you're not thinking anymore. Stuff is just happening. Like for me, when I play basketball, I'm not thinking of other stuff. Like I'm really in the flow. When I'm playing music with my bass guitar, like I'm not thinking about stuff. I'm just literally letting the outpour of expression go through my fingers, and whatever happens, happens. And for me, that's a way to kind of like break thought and to separate from that. I think that practices the same mechanism that meditation practices, but I would love to hear how you've approached that in your life.
Yeah, well, first, I agree with you. I think we kind of, as a society, we kind of have this predisposition to think that meditation is like sitting, cross-legged and not thinking anything, and that's really actually not what meditation is. It's meditation can occur at any moment, and that's a great example. Like when you're playing basketball, when you're being in the present moment, your thoughts might still be there, or maybe not at all, but that's not the focus, right? When you're being in the moment, that is being in consciousness. That is being in mindfulness or meditative moment. So, I don't, when you're playing the bass, and I see videos of you playing the bass, and I could see you're in the moment, you're in a meditative state. For me, I do still meditate, but it's very different than it used to be. I bring usually one of my notebooks with me and a pencil, and I'm sometimes writing. But I would say that when I'm feeling under duress or upset, there are a couple of mechanisms I like to use that help me get into that mindfulness or that meditative state. The best one for me is my breath. Because if I take a moment and I truly focus on a deep, slow breath, typically through my nose, and kind of feel what that feels like in my body. What is that? Not just my lungs, but what does it feel like in my arms? What does it feel like in my head? Mm-hmm. And so my attention turns to that moment, to that breath. And that can often give me that space like we've talked about today. And when that happens, everything kind of realigns. And now all of a sudden, this sucks. And I can do this. Probably the middle of last year, business was awful. First year of the pandemic, it was okay. Everything kind of carried through from the year before, and it was fine. Last year was awful, and about mid-year through, the 4 months through, I was like, I had a lot of anxiety about it, a lot of panic and fear. And then when I was in a better headspace, when I was in a more, mindful state, I said, okay, this is all happening and it sucks. And these feelings I'm having are genuine. They're real feelings. And what can I do about it? And then all of a sudden, my mind flipped from being the hammer to a tool that was actually helping me, right? To something that was a proactive tool. Instead of hammering on myself, I was hammering on a solution. Maybe that's a good analogy. And I was like, well, why don't I get in touch with all my clients and do blogging for them if they're interested, right? That helps with the marketing that we do. What about if we do this or that? So I reached out to about maybe 15 clients, and about 5 of them said, yeah, do that. And all of a sudden there was a solution in place. Instead of me beating myself up, blaming myself, we all do that. There's a pandemic that we had nothing to do with, and yet we'll still sit there and blame ourselves for slow business or for being irritable with our kids. Yeah. Man, okay, if I got hit in the head with a can from my brother when he was a little kid, it's a normal reaction to be like, whoa, what the heck? Yeah. And it's that fight or flight. I have found that is what I'll call like a conditioned response. Yeah. And being an awareness of that conditioned response can help us make a new habit, so to speak, a more positive one, where we pause first and say, ow, that really hurt. Hey, just, let me have that can. That's an owie. We don't want to hit people with a can, And now it's like, yes, there was a consequence. Yes, my brother knew. I probably yelled at him when I was a 20-year-old. But that condition response can be changed, although it can take a really long time.
Yeah.
And the first step is that awareness, that observing of, okay, I'm exhibiting a condition response that I always do. It's like you said, it's like a switch. It's flipped, and you're in it, and you're engulfed by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the physical, especially, like saying you got hit with a can, like I feel like that's the highest level of switch flipping, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you go from a state maybe of peace to a state of anger or frustration, or something bad is happening to me and I need to react right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that, when I'm out playing basketball and we play for 2 or 3 hours on a court, a lot of times it's just on like a Sunday midday, and I come home, man, I'm in such a good headspace, and it's probably just working out in general. Even for me, from a music standpoint, like if I got to pick up my kids once in a while in the evening, and driving there sucks. It's a 20-minute drive. If I'm in a good place before I leave, that drive's fine. If I jam for a little while before I leave, I'm playing some music or something for 20 minutes before I go, I'm in a different headspace than if I, just wrote an email to a client where now I'm hoping that I'm going to get a job. It's totally different. And it's like, how can you get yourself to that place where like you don't react as heavily when something bad happens, like for real, like when I get done working out, or if I'm playing basketball or something and I come home, like my kids could literally do anything and I'm probably not going to freak out. Like I'm just going to stay calm. I'm going to be fine because I've already like tortured myself. I've already, oh man, have I put out some energy, like I've busted my ass. I've been pushing people. I've been jumping. I've been shooting. I've been like exhausting my body in ways that are way more difficult than what you're doing to me right now. And it's like that kind of a thing, I think, is good for you. It definitely is good for you in more ways than one. But that's a mechanism to avert, the switching of a switch, the flipping of a switch.
Totally. And that's another thing I do consistently is physical activity. It could be anything for different people. It could be yoga, basketball. I do this HIIT program. It's like a high intensity. It takes like 10, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. But what you're talking about, first of all, it's self-care. It is a form of self-care. And this physical activity, and this is a proven fact. This is actually an earlier podcast from season 1. We had a 2-parter with Mark Brady, who's like a brain guy. That's what he does for a living. He is like a brain guy. And he taught me that's called metabolizing stress. Through the act of physical activity, we are actually working through, and almost like just like we metabolize food and then like go to the bathroom and it's gone,
Mm-hmm.
When we're exercising, we are metabolizing stress, and it's actually like literally leaving our body. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. And it's the thing about exercise is everybody's in a different place.
Yeah.
And some people are younger, some are older, some have health issues. So it's really important, like, not to compare yourself to others and say, well, he went and played basketball for 3 hours and I can only go for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's okay. What works for you?
Yeah.
You could have this idol like me, Zig Ziglar or Eckhart Tolle, and what he does might not work for me or you. So we have to find what works for us. Doesn't mean we're failures because of it. It means we found our tool, our mechanism, our way of metabolizing or meditating. You might have asthma and not be able to use your breath as easily to get to that place. So what else could it be? It might be music. It might be playing bass. It might be looking at art. Really doesn't matter, as long as it works for you.
Yeah. Even reading a book, that could be enough to like get you into a mental space where it changes your being. You all of a sudden you think different. Your brain waves are on a different level now because you've gone into this different world or this different space. I mean, yeah, it could be anything that interests you, could be the right thing to help you move, out of a fight or flight kind of a brain set,
Yeah. You got to experiment with it. I love to write. I've got my notebooks, my pencils.
Oh yeah.
And I noticed that when I'm using my notebooks more, I am in a better place. Not perfect, not fixed, but a better place than I was in before I did it.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said about habits, right? Like you've got good habits and bad habits. And I think, I mean, I was just listening to a podcast recently with Tim Ferriss where they were talking about this. And it was more so like, if you can't fit in your hour workout, don't just not do it because I only have 10 or 15 minutes, just do a lesser workout. Still
Yep.
check it off. Cool. I did it. It wasn't as much as I should have done, but I still did it. To keep the habit every day, I think overall in the long term is going to do you more than saying, oh, I don't have the full time, so I'm just going to skip it today. Because man, it's easy to drop habits. It's so easy to drop them. Like, if you're going to a gym and it's your New Year's resolution, which don't go to a gym, just work out at home. Like if you really want to, if you need the motivation, if you need the equipment, go to a gym. But man, if you can just wake up in the morning and just say, cool, I'm going to do some push-ups. I'm going to do some crunches. I'm going to, do some squats. I'm going to walk on the treadmill. Or I'm just going to go walk outside with my dog or with my kids, that kind of thing. The habit, I think forming that is the better of the thing rather than saying, oh, I hit the goal. I did an hour or I meditated for 20 minutes. Like, oh man, I only got 5 minutes. Just do it anyways. Meditate for 5 minutes. You're going to be better off than you were anyways.
Yeah. Yes, I didn't have enough time to do it all, and I did some.
Yeah.
And it's about looking at it from that perspective. So you look at it as a positive instead of being that beating yourself up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But somehow, Kyle, we're at an hour already. But I do want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, because we could go on for another hour. This is amazing.
For real.
Yeah, man. Okay. So what is one of the biggest challenges you have faced in your life, and how did you handle it?
Oh man, that's tough. I feel like in terms of the biggest challenge, I don't know. Like there's nothing that comes to mind as like, oh, that one thing was the biggest challenge you ever had. I think every day is kind of a new challenge. I mean, for the fact that I put myself out of my comfort zone to go from being a salaried employee to not having a salary and then having to create all of the value that brings my income by myself. That was a huge challenge that, you just got to jump in with both feet. You got to take a risk, got to be ready to just work for yourself and try. That was something huge that I'm so grateful that I did, because my life is amazing because I did that. If I was still employed somewhere, I would probably be super depressed, and I don't think I would be a very good person to be around. I wouldn't work very hard, and it's just not the right life for me. I mean, we bought a duplex right before the pandemic happened. Spent a bunch of money to do that and to get it as an investment property. We live in one side and rent out the other side. That was one of those things where it was like, I hope we're doing this right. I hope we're taking a risk. Like I've never been a landlord before. I guess I'm going to start doing that now, so it's like, that was a challenge that, I had to put myself out of my comfort zone and just get ready to feel some feelings that I wasn't comfortable with, things that I don't know how to do. Cool. Now at, like 8:00 at night, my tenants are texting me that the heat doesn't work. The furnace is going off. Like, okay, take care of it, figure it out. This is on you now. You chose to do this. So that's one of those situations that was very challenging. And now we've got an accepted offer on a house. And so we're moving into that, and we're putting money down on that too. And it's just like, you don't know what you're getting into. I don't know what kind of condition the house is in. We had an inspection, but like, you're going to move to a new place and you're going to start your life in this new place. And you just got to be ready for the challenges that are coming, and every little thing that you can do to see as a success, like every time you put yourself out of a comfort zone and you manage it, even if it's not to your expectations, even if you failed, like those are experiences that you can live off of, that you can build confidence on moving forward. And that's what I do, is like, I'm not as good at sales as I am now because I never pushed myself out of my comfort zone. Like I failed so many times by trying to attain something that I wasn't ready yet to attain. And it taught me stuff, that's why I can do the things that I do now more successfully than I did 7 or 8 years ago. So I think every challenge is kind of the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways, it's like every day is hard. Every day you don't know what's going to happen. It might be easy and fun. It might have been, I got to do this fun thing all day long, and it flowed. It was great. And then tomorrow you might find out that like your grandparent has cancer, or, like your child broke their leg and now like dude, that's hard. You know, like you just try to be ready for it and try to understand that the things that you've gone through in the past are going to help you overcome these difficult challenges. Because I probably haven't come to the very most difficult challenge in my life. You know, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure there's going to be a moment that's so utterly difficult. Like, how do you face it? I don't know.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It sounds like and you kind of already answered through the hour how you kind of deal with these things and how you work through them. That was my last question. I feel like we talked about that.
Sorry to be a downer on it, but
No,
I think it's just one of those things that like you have to see it as a continuum. You know, like every day, like it's just we can't stop time. It keeps flowing. Everything changes. Just be ready for it. Again, like I don't know, like I'm getting more and more into stoicism just for that aspect, to understand that like the world around me is not within my control. You know, like you have to accept things as they are. You have to accept what you can control and just work to be the best version of yourself, because that's how you can make the most positive influence. You know, I mean, like Gandhi said, is like, be the change you want to see in the world. Like I try to embody that. Like, you know, the only way I'm going to be able to teach my kids anything is to show them this is why you should do it. I'm not going to dictate to you what to do. I want you to see me as the example of somebody who succeeded and pursued and persisted through the bullshit to get to where they wanted to be. It's not easy. You know, it's a path that is worth fighting for, and you have to be willing to fight for it in a way that's worth it to you. You know, like to die on Sim Hill that's not worth dying on is stupid. That's not self-preservation, right? You have to have the mindfulness enough to say like, oh, this is not worth it. Like, I don't need to. I can let you win, or I can, you know, like be open-minded to what you have to say and just listen. And I'll probably learn something if I don't let my ego get in the way, and I'll be better for it. You know, like I'm going to grow because I didn't have to fight you. I could just listen and observe and, you know, be thoughtful.
Yeah. Well, with that, it's amazing how the time flies. Just tell us how people can find out more about you if they want to online.
Sure. Yeah, you can go to my website if you care to see my photography work. It's crimsonsunstudios.com. You can find me on Instagram at Kyle_Wege, Wege. You can also find Crimson Sun Studios on Instagram at Crimson Sun Studios. Also on LinkedIn, if you're a professional and you want to connect there, if you want to just see more of what I do, it's just on LinkedIn, Kyle Wege.
Cool. And then Kyle was involved in the making of a film called The Good, the Bad, and the Dubby.
Yes.
And if you want to check that out, it's at Good Bad Dubby, which is DUBBY.com. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a reggae Western that we filmed out in Montana. It was a lot of fun. We did rewriting of the classic reggae tunes from the Dollars trilogy from Ennio Morricone, who has now passed, but we, you know, carry on his legacy and his music by doing fun new creations with it. So if you like reggae, check it out. The Good, the Bad, and the Dubby. Cool.
Well, Kyle, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and for being a great guest.
Thanks, Joey. I appreciate being here, and you've had a lot of great guests. So to be in that company, I'm grateful.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for you as well. And everybody, thank you for listening. And until next time, stay well.